This is Tiffany Martinez.
Yeah, it's working.
And I'm just going to ask her a few questions, and then maybe open it up for other people to ask her questions. You are doing so well now, and I imagine that it might be hard for people to believe that you had some of these symptoms and some of these struggles. So I was just wondering if you might talk about some of those early warning signs and what it was like for you.
Right. So yeah, you're definitely right. Like, people see me today and are like, there could have been nothing wrong with you, sorry. So some of the early warning signs when I was 17, I can remember just being, like the negative symptoms such as depression, being withdrawn socially, and I just started, you couldn't really pinpoint what was going on. It was just so subtle. And so I was at the University of Southern Maine. I was in my freshman year, and just having some weird feelings, just not really being able to grasp like what was going on. So, and it was really, like, it's hard to describe those symptoms. I just remember being really isolated and being just different than what I was before I started college. So that's when I started going to see a counselor at the University of Southern Maine, and through a couple different sessions, I think she picked up on, okay, so there's a little bit more going on than what she thought I had come in for, what I thought I had come in there for. So then she referred me to a family nurse practitioner who was in that same office. And I remember her giving me a screening, like a test, and just asked me a bunch of questions. And from that, she was like, okay, there's definitely something going on. Some of the questions I answered were not normal. And so that's when I got referred to peer. And then from there, you were able to evaluate or sort of assess like some more specific things that were going on that I didn't realize were more serious.
Yeah. What were some of those things that, like some of the thoughts you were having and some of the...
Yeah, it's funny because I remember thinking really bizarre thoughts, and for a while, you just think that they're sort of normal, and I rationalize them as being normal, but then when talking to you and realizing like, oh, those aren't normal thoughts. For example, I had a dorm, and so every time I left the dorm, there was trees there that were in the courtyard. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like those trees are gonna collapse on me. Like for some reason, I thought that was gonna happen. And in my head, I thought that was normal to think that. And everything was just subtle. Like you couldn't really it wasn't like I woke up one day and was like, bam, all of these really weird symptoms, everything, it was just progression. And then, just having like seeing figures and shadows in the corner of your eye, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it sort of, did here and there, and then subtle noises. So those were the things I think that were alarming for providers, and they picked up on that, thankfully.
And what do you feel like was helpful? I mean, so you connected with the program through the University Health Center. Right. And what was your experience once you were in the program? Like, what was most helpful?
So going in, like mental illness wasn't on my radar, so learning what the program is doing and then realizing that genetics is a huge part and that I had a father who had a mental illness, and then knowing that and being able to piece together like, oh, this is potentially like something I could have. And so receiving a lot of education around that, but also like the signs the symptoms I was experiencing, and like just the support system, like someone else mentioned earlier, like between getting referred from the counselor to the nurse practitioner to you and peer, everything happened so rapidly. So it was so unusual to, see you one day and then all of a sudden next week I'm starting up on this new program. And so I felt supported from the start. And I was really, I felt even though I was really scared, it was nice to be able to come in and be welcomed and know that these are people that are skilled and experienced, and they want to help. They want to help you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And for you now, like, I mean, what, I guess, you know, this is years later. So what helps you now? That,
Right. So now, okay, so I ended the program back in 2009, and when I actually ended, I was off my medication, and so now I've been able just to go and do psychotherapy, and I do that twice a month, and that's just for my own, for myself. I think everyone should be in psychotherapy. I'm like all about it. It's helpful. So that's been really huge. But I think also knowing the warning signs. So, you know, like someone mentioned insight. Like I have a great amount of insight right now that I'm able to tell what my body's doing and how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. So if something did occur in the future, hopefully not, that I can recognize that and identify that. So that's huge. Because I didn't know nothing when I started. So.
Yeah. And now your career,
yeah,
you're going into psychiatric.
Right. Yeah. It's
nursing.
It's exciting. I love it. I love that I'm going into this field, and it's kind of unusual to have this sort of experience and then going into the field. I'm excited.
So, does anyone have questions for Tiffany? Oh, yeah.
For sharing your story with us. It seemed from the video that you yourself had sought help, maybe even tentatively, but you had made the first step because you were really concerned about what you were experiencing. And I'm wondering if you could reflect perhaps on how unusual that was, how many other young adults who might be having a kind of unusual symptoms might not have the courage to be able to seek help.
Sure. No, that's it brings me back to when I first started. It wasn't my idea to go seek counseling. Like I didn't want to do it, but I had an aunt and a boyfriend at the time who was like, and it was people from the outside that could recognize me kind of going in this downward spiral. So they were the ones that pushed me to do it. So that definitely helped, because I don't think I would have been able to do it myself. I think it really helped when someone was there to push me in that way, because they could see like all these external behaviors that I was showing, and so yeah.
Yeah, David.
You know, it's something I'm thinking, Tiffany, of some of the early observations I've heard from the RAISE project that Bob was talking about earlier, and this is completely anecdotal, but they report having problems engaging people. And that's often reported as an issue, is how do you get people, particularly young adults at that stage in their life, to start to participate in the program. Can you talk a little bit about, you said other people sort of helped you start to get into counseling, then you hooked up and you made these rapid transitions, so it wasn't, you don't have to wait 6 weeks to see somebody kind of thing.
Right.
Can you talk about what in the program, was it initially engaging? Did you stay in it because your folks and your friends really wanted you to? What made you stick with it and engage?
That's a great question, because definitely as a young adult, I didn't want to admit to myself like there's something wrong with me. I didn't want to be different. So what really helped, honestly, was like being connected to Sarah. I've been with her since the beginning, and like I was just telling her, I remember I literally couldn't even leave the campus to go to my appointments because I was just that isolated. So she came and got me. So it was like reaching out and having the program be able to just take over when I couldn't do anything on my own. But it's really hard. I mean, you're scared and you're confused with these symptoms, and like, who can you talk to, because no one's going to understand you. So having them be open to it made it okay to talk about it. And every time I went, they were just so engaging, and I didn't feel any bad, non-judgmental. Like, it was huge. So being able to talk to them about it was so easy and open, and you could trust them. So I think initially having the relationship with Sarah was what really helped. She came to the school, she met me where I was at, and then I was able to take baby steps from there.
So much for sharing your story, and it's so nice to see how well you're doing. I have watched that first video I don't know how many times, so it's great to see that you're doing very well. This is more of a comment than a question. I think this just makes me reflect on the impact of having a consumer to tell their story. And one of the things we haven't talked much about in terms of services is the potential impact of a peer or family partner in our clinics. That's one of the things that we've had in our clinic in California. And in terms of engagement, when you have someone who has the illness and can go to that person who refuses to leave their house or their room and says, no, I know what's going on, come with me. Our peer partner kept people in group, kept people in treatment, and that, going back to the previous panel and talking about what we can get paid for, those folks are often paraprofessionals, and so oftentimes in our reimbursement models, they're not paid for, but they are hugely important in these programs. So I just think that's another part that we should be talking about, and I think Tiffany's really representing how powerful that voice can be.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and Tara, in the next panel about the California and Oregon implementation, those sites have peer supports as part of their model, so that might be nice for them to speak to that some too.
Tiffany, did you and your family participate in the multifamily groups, and did you meet? What was the effect of meeting other kids who were sharing your issues?
So for me, I didn't participate in the multifamily groups, actually. I'm from where I was going to college. I was actually 4.5 hours away from my family. So that was a little bit different. I kept in contact with them. But unfortunately, we weren't able to participate in that. I did, however, start a really good support system down in Portland. I did have family down there, which was helpful, and close relatives from where I was from. So.
Hello? Oh, okay, sorry. So I'm reading the bio, and I noticed you're from the Passamaquoddy tribe, is correct?
I am, yeah.
All right, so I wanted to know if in your treatment and care, if you brought any of your traditions from your culture to help you.
Yeah, I grew up really strong. Like, with my culture was a huge thing. So when I was in Portland, I kept up with some of the traditions that I had been participating in since I was 8 years old. And that was huge for me, and that was like a part of my, like, having my own identity. So bringing that to Portland was definitely like a coping kind of thing, for sure.
Oh, one more.
Can you talk to me a little bit about, and sort of on the engagement theme still, and part of the notion that I hear when people talk about not being engaged is prescriptive approaches that where you tell people what they have to do to get better, rather than trying to understand kind of their goals and what they're wanting to accomplish. And oftentimes young adults who have these problems in college are counseled actually to drop out of school, like we heard earlier, and sort of get off their life path. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the supported education component and how your goals were reflected in your work with Sarah and with the program?
Sure. So when I first started treatment, I don't remember if I would start off with medications right off. I remember just building really good relationships. It wasn't just Sarah. I had another psychiatrist who did prescribe medications to me. But med adherence was definitely an issue, for sure. I mean, I wasn't the perfect patient at all. I had struggled with that, but oftentimes we would come back and we would talk about, like, you know, what those issues were, and I always felt like I was heard and listened to, and so I didn't feel like they were pushing things on me. And I felt like I was going at my own pace, and they were always there. When I had an episode or some things were just like not going good, they stuck it out with me. And then, so meeting me where I was at and allowing me to be heard, and then also, you know, challenge me a little bit, but I felt really, really supported. Yeah, I really liked, I mean, I love Sarah, but I also loved my psychiatrist as well. He was fabulous. He was great to talk to, so good relationships.
And what about the Office of Support on the campus? Because that was kind of an important.
So since I was in school at the university, you know, it was helpful because I was receiving accommodations through classwork, and that was huge because I was, you know, an A student in high school, and so coming into college and struggling with my studies really put me down. So being able to have those accommodations was so helpful, so I can keep up with my schoolwork and not have to drop out. Yeah.
My son had a similar, I think, experience as you did in terms of how important that support was to getting back on track. For him, he was actually out of college for a year and a half, except for taking some local courses. But if it hadn't, but his goal, and I think the reason that he was willing to be engaged in the first place, because he saw the peer staff as wanting to help him achieve his goal to get back to school, because that's what mattered to him as a 20-year-old. And I think that what the peer staff did to make that happen was critical. They encouraged him to kind of try to keep up locally in some classes, but they also, when it came time, and when he improved a lot and it got closer to being able to go back, which took a year and a half, but he was determined to go back to his school. The peer people did, you know, they were able to be in touch with the school and give them, you know, an assessment of his progress, which obviously he would not have gone back to school if they hadn't received that from an accredited source. And I think just all the other little steps that were offered to him and that you're talking about too, it's just so critical in terms of, it's like having an advocate and having those liaisons to help you get back on track.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, having an advocate or someone to speak up for you when you can't speak up for yourself. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Allison. I'm from Active Minds, and we do our work primarily on college campuses around mental health education. And one of the things that we find, we work with college students who come to our program for any number of reasons, and one of the words that keeps coming up from them is this word hope, and how so many young adults are just left without hope for whatever reason. Oftentimes in mental health in general, there's just such negative images out there that if you are a young person who starts struggling, you don't want to admit it because, gosh, you're going to be one of those people who has made the news. And I guess I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what has given you hope and what gave you hope through the recovery process for you, what continues to, and maybe what you've seen in some of your peers within peers or your friends on campus and what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question because it's hard to pinpoint specific things. Like, I mean, yeah, definitely peer was a huge part of my hope. Having this team of people that were so supportive and helpful. And I had a few friends that sort of knew what was going on, but not really, because even then I was afraid to admit what was going on, so it's that embarrassment as well. So my hope came from peer, really, like a huge part of it, but also working through my own counseling and my own thoughts. And then the cultural piece, like I mentioned earlier, just keeping that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what it is. I think it's different for everyone and where they find it. So for me, peer was huge. They were my resource. They were like my godsend. So like, yeah, it's hard to say what will work for one. It won't work for another. But
it's interesting that we're talking about colleges. It's worth saying not everyone is so enlightened. We encounter some colleges that really hit the panic button when they hear about serious mental illness, particularly if anyone utters the word suicide. They want that kid home, by tonight, and they call the parents. Others respond much more thoughtfully, but I think there's a huge bit of work to be done in that area.
I just want to make a comment, which is we didn't really get to talk about sort of the theoretical, protocol-driven aspects of these treatments. But family psychoeducation, assertive community treatment, and supported education all are incredibly and focally patient-centered. So in all three of those treatments, the first question you ask is, what do you want? And how do you want to get there, and what would your goals be? And that's the end of the discussion, usually. Sometimes there, as Tiffany described, there is a bit of a challenge. Well, if you don't want to do anything, that may not be, we may keep going after that, but I think it gets at David's question, which is, and it's just wonderful for us to sit here and see it reflected back, because that was the intent, is always do what the young person and their family want to do first and foremost. And of course, there's a huge, again, evidence base for that, but it needs to be said. And I wanted to thank Tiffany especially for taking the chance to be here with us today. And sort of, I think Sarah and I and Donna are probably pretty happy right now, thinking at least one person.
I'm glad I could be helpful. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And just to end on a positive note, Tiffany arrived in DC yesterday having gotten a job offer.